T T T V V T Q V V T T T V V T Q V V T T
Virtual teaching tips and tricks videos featuring Dr. Travis Rieder. Featuring Dr. Travis Rieder.
Hello, my name is Travis Rieder, and I am faculty at the Berman Institute of Bioethics, where I direct the Master of Bioethics degree program. I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes talking to you about Zoom privacy, both institutional policy, but mostly what I, as an ethicist, will call ethics and norms about teaching in the Zoom environment. So in the fall of 2020, the university came out with these guidelines governing student privacy in the recording of class sessions on Zoom, because these recordings should be treated as subject to federal student privacy law, so FERPA. Now, these guidelines are easily found online. They were also disseminated to faculty in the fall. I'm going to highlight a few points that I think are exceptionally important, because there's actually a tension within them, which is not to criticize them, it's just the way this Zoom world works. So I want to talk about that tension, what it means for our classrooms, and how I worked to resolve it. I've only had a couple cracks at this, like everybody else. Zoom teaching is new to me, so I'm not claiming that I've kind of found the end-all be-all solution, but it seemed to work for my particular classrooms, which I prefer to be discussion-heavy, which I thought was going to be a challenge in this era of worrying about student privacy. So let me get to that. The university guidelines said, amongst other things, the following. Students need to be informed that the classes are going to be recorded if they're going to be recorded. So a really good way to do this is to actually include a section on your syllabus in Course Plus. So there's a little drop-down section you can add now called Zoom Privacy Practices and Recording Guidelines, right? So that includes required information, and faculty can customize how and when they're going to use recordings in their classroom, right? But students also need to be told that they can minimize their ability to be identified in recordings. And they can do that by muting their audio, not turning on their camera, and not participating in chats. Now that, combined with using the right features in the Zoom recording settings, which you can also find in these guidelines how to do that, will make it such that even though when I'm teaching I can see the name of the student on a little black box, that part isn't recorded. So if I have a student, John Doe, who never wants to be identified, they never unmute, they never use the chat, they never turn on their camera, they don't show up in any recordings at all. Now, of course, there's a cost to that to me as a professor, because I never get to engage with them in class, but it protects their privacy. But the flip side of that is, if you as a professor are going to require your students to identify themselves so that they can participate, then you ought not to record the class session. And so if that's just an absolute requirement for your course, you shouldn't record class. Students need to know that so that they know that they have to be there at the synchronous session. They can't make it up later. It'll be like a live in-person class where if you miss it, you miss it. All right. So all of that is really important advice. It's information that the university really needed to give us, but I've already alluded to this tension that is between the need to protect student privacy and my goals as a professor of wanting to engage students in real time in class. So I should note up front, not all classes are likely to find this as problematic as I do. If you're teaching a largely lecture-based class where you have a PowerPoint and you're going to say the things that you need to say, and the student's job is largely to receive that, take notes, study it, and do something in the future. As a philosopher, I don't know how normal that is for classes these days. I took some of them in my college experience, right? But if that sort of teaching is what you're planning on doing, this might not actually matter very much. What I'm going to describe as my solution to trying to address that tension also works particularly well for me because I'm an ethicist and I'm teaching ethics classes. And so the ethics of privacy protection is actually an independently important conversation. So I basically challenged students on the very first day of class, before we did anything else, to think through our competing values about privacy protection and doing a certain kind of classwork together as our first exercise. Now, I put that up front to make it clear that this might not feel natural for you, and if so, then I'm sorry, this isn't very helpful. But I will also say that the students found it really helpful, and so even if you don't feel like this is particularly your domain, because I'm going to use some like ethicsy language about the importance of protecting people's privacy, nothing I'm saying here is technical, and so you are welcome to pick this up and try it. Handing it to you, no copyright, try it if you want. Okay, so here we go. The very first thing I say to students, before I press record, so this first conversation happens before I ever record any class on the first day of class. So I did this for the first time at the beginning of term 1 this year, operating under the new pandemic reality. And I basically said to the students, look, I want to be maximally flexible and understanding during this crazy time that we're living through. People are dealing with unprecedented stresses and pressures. And so if you can't make it to class, or you can't turn on your camera because of where you are, if you haven't slept and you just really don't want to be on camera, whatever the case may be, I don't want it to be an absolute requirement that you be present, that you be on camera. So I want classes to be recorded, to be usable later, and I also don't want to make a strict requirement that you identify yourself, right? But I also need to admit upfront that class is just not very good if no one participates. I'm going to be talking about X, Y, or Z. For me, it was, the ethics of science and public health and policy and medicine, and we need to discuss that stuff and digest it together. And I just can't do that without interlocutors, without you all. So there's the tension. This class should have lots of discussion. I want you to ask me questions, ask one another questions, but you need to understand that I feel like I need to record this class for others, for your colleagues, maybe for you. And so if you do that kind of engagement, you'll be recorded. And I will do my very best to protect those recordings. The university does their very best to protect those recordings. So some of the things we're going to do are, for instance, these will all be deleted after the class is over. I'm asking you now not to share them. So they'll be made available to you as students. Please do not distribute them. But the thing is, I can't guarantee that a recording of you doesn't make it out. Right? It is possible for a student to download a recording, or if I make the settings such that they're not downloadable, it is of course possible to record like with my phone on a computer. Like, it's just impossible for me to guarantee that if you allow yourself to be recorded, that it won't eventually be shared. Now, I should be clear, I'm making a bigger deal out of this than you might make out of it. You might be like, so what? I'm going to say things. I don't care if that's recorded and shared. But it is important because I care about your privacy, and I care about what I can and can't protect in terms of your privacy. So my question to you, the students, the class, is, should we record the class for flexibility's sake or not for maximal protection of privacy? Now, I've already said I've got this strong inclination to record for maximal flexibility. And so if there's anyone at all in the class who really needs that flexibility, that's the side I'm going to default on. But I want to hear out everybody's concerns about protection of privacy. And then whichever way we decide to go as a group, are there ways to mitigate the costs of going in that direction? Okay. So I should say that we had a really interesting conversation my first day of class, both terms in the fall. And the students, by and large, didn't find this a big deal. But they valued being heard. They thought it was interesting to discuss it. And they really valued that I said up front, like, I will never require you to turn on your cameras. I'll never require you to participate in order to get the grade if we decide to record. So my preferred conclusion, which I never stated, but I let the class discuss, and they did find their way here. So you certainly steer it in this direction if you want, but I didn't have to, was that we will record class. The students will keep their cameras on whenever possible and participate normally to the degree that's possible when your box is on a screen. But no one is required to do this. And then all of us pledged to one another, so we made a promise to keep these recordings private. right? So now we are accountable to one another because we are obligated to one another because we've made this promise. And anyone can request a pause of the recording at any time, including me. So any student or me can at any time say, okay, I have a question, I have anything I want to talk about, can we pause the recording? We can do that at any point, and then that's just one piece that anyone who's not there will miss out on if they try to watch it later. And then we can have an off-the-record conversation. Interesting feature, in 2 terms of teaching, not a single request to turn off the recording was made. So this turned out not to be a serious concern of theirs. But like I said, they really appreciated being heard and having that option. So I don't know if the transparency about this conversation at the very beginning helped students or not. But the feedback was that they liked the conversation. They liked thinking through the genuine challenge here and understanding that privacy protection is genuinely important and not just, a part of FERPA law, which sounds very kind of disconnected and cold. And the class went really, really well. I mean, as far as I can tell, as well as possible under these circumstances. So over the course of 2 terms, all of my students who came on a given day, which was 90+% throughout both terms, they all had their cameras on the entire time, with the occasional random person who came in, didn't turn their camera on, no questions asked. They don't have to explain themselves to me. People who couldn't make for classes had access to the recordings, but by and large, almost everybody came, and everyone who came, virtually all of them had their cameras on. We had lively discussions. So who knows if we can chalk that up to having a conversation, but I figure it can't hurt. So there you are. Hopefully it helped. And if not, I'm sorry for the last 10 minutes of your life.